Right now, New York City is an absolute chaos. Max B just came home after over a decade behind bars. And at the exact same moment, Jim Jones drops a brand new podcast episode. And listen, this timing, it's either the biggest coincidence in hip-hop history or the most calculated chess move we've ever seen. Because while the entire city is celebrating Max B's freedom, Jim Jones hasn't said a single word about it. Not one. Not on Instagram, not on Twitter, not even on his own podcast. And that silence? That silence is louder than anything he could have said. But it gets way crazier because Dave East shows up to Max B's welcome home dinner, and when he gets asked about it on Jim's podcast, the tension in that room is so thick you could cut it with a knife. And then Fabulous drops one of the most devastating lines I've ever heard about loyalty, brotherhood, and the unspoken rules of the streets. So in this video, we're breaking down everything: the timing, the silence, the loyalty war, and whether a reconciliation between Jim Jones and Max B is actually possible after 15 years of bad blood. And I'm telling you right now, people are not going to want to hear some of this. But before we get into it, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, because this is the kind of conversation that needs to be seen by everyone. All right, let's get into it. So here's what happened. Max B, the wave god himself, gets released from prison after serving over a decade. And New York is buzzing. I mean, this is a massive moment for the culture. Fans have been waiting for this day for years. French Montana's been campaigning for his freedom. The city is ready to welcome him back. And then, literally at the exact same time, Jim Jones drops a brand new episode of his podcast. Now, on the surface, you might think, okay, so what? Jim has a podcast. He releases episodes. But here's the thing. The timing of this release is so perfectly aligned with Max B's homecoming that people immediately started asking questions. Was this just a coincidence? Or was this Jim Jones making a statement? Because if you know anything about the history between Jim Jones and Max B, you know this isn't just some friendly competition. This is deep. This is personal. This is the kind of conflict that has real-life consequences. And the streets? The streets started whispering immediately. Jim is playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers. Now, before we go any further, make sure you leave a like on this video and drop a comment letting me know what you think about all of this, because this story is wild. All right, so let's talk about this timing, because this is where things get really interesting. Max B's release was scheduled. People knew he was coming home. The date was public information. So Jim Jones and his team, they knew this was happening. And yet they chose to drop a podcast episode on the exact same day. Now, there are two ways to look at this. Option one, it's just a coincidence. Jim releases episodes on a schedule, and this just happened to line up with Max B's release. Okay, fine. I guess that's possible. But option two is way more interesting. Option two is that Jim Jones knew exactly what he was doing. He knew that Max B coming home was going to dominate the conversation. It was going to be everywhere. Social media, blogs, YouTube, everywhere. And by dropping his podcast at the same time, he could do a few things. First, he could hijack the narrative. He could insert himself into the conversation without ever having to actually say Max B's name. Second, he could capture the algorithm. If people are searching for Max B content, Jim's podcast could show up in those searches and recommendations. And third, and this is the big one, he could control the conversation. Because if Jim doesn't say anything about Max B, but releases content at the same time, he's essentially saying, I'm not giving this moment any energy. And in the world of hip-hop, where everything is about attention, visibility, and respect, that's a power move. Now, I'm not saying Jim Jones definitely did this on purpose, but I am saying that the timing is extremely suspicious. And when you look at the fact that Jim has been in this game for decades and he knows how the media works, how the internet works, how to control a narrative, yeah, I think he knew exactly what he was doing. And honestly, it's kind of genius. Because without saying a single word about Max B, Jim managed to make himself part of the story. He's in the conversation now. People are talking about him, analyzing his moves, debating his intentions. And Max B? He's sharing the spotlight whether he likes it or not. Which brings us to the scariest part of this whole situation. Jim Jones' silence. Now, listen, in hip-hop, when something big happens, especially something involving someone you have history with, people expect you to say something, whether it's a congratulations, a subliminal shot, something. But Jim said nothing. Max B comes home after over a decade in prison. The entire city is celebrating. French Montana's posting, other New York artists are showing love, and Jim Jones? Crickets. No Instagram post, no tweet, no shout out on the podcast, nothing. And that silence is intentional. Because Jim Jones is not the type of person to stay quiet by accident. He's one of the most vocal, outspoken figures in hip-hop. So when he chooses to be silent, it means something. And what it means, at least to me, is that Jim is making a statement without making a statement. He's saying, I don't need to acknowledge this. I don't need to give this energy. I'm moving on my own terms. And in a way, that's more powerful than anything he could have said. Because now, instead of people talking about what Jim said, they're talking about what he didn't say. They're analyzing his silence. They're debating his motives. They're wondering what he's thinking. And that keeps him at the center of the conversation. Now, some people might say, well, maybe Jim just doesn't care anymore. Maybe he's moved on. And okay, maybe. But if you really think Jim Jones, who has been beefing with Max B for 15 years, just suddenly doesn't care the moment Max gets out, I don't know, man. That doesn't add up to me. Because this isn't just some random beef. This is deep. This goes back to Dipset, to money, to loyalty, to respect. This is the kind of conflict that doesn't just disappear because time passes. And the fact that Jim is staying silent, that makes me think he's being strategic. He's not ignoring Max B. He's watching. He's waiting. He's seeing how this plays out. And that's honestly scarier than if he had just come out and said something, because silence leaves room for anything to happen. And speaking of things happening, this is where Dave East enters the picture. And oh man, does it get messy. All right, so Max B comes home and there's a welcome dinner. Big event, lots of people, celebration vibes. And Dave East, who is also from New York, who is also connected to the culture, gets invited. Now, Dave East going to this dinner might not seem like a big deal on the surface, but here's the problem. Dave East is also cool with Jim Jones. So when Dave shows up to Max B's dinner, it immediately raises questions. And when Dave appears on Jim Jones' podcast after going to that dinner, it's on. Because co-host Mino does not waste any time. He goes straight for the jugular. He asked Dave, point blank, why you pulled up there? And you could feel the tension in the room. This is not a casual question. This is an interrogation. Because what Mino is really asking is, whose side are you on? And Dave East knows it. You can hear it in his voice when he answers. He says he got invited. He says he wanted to show respect. He says he's from New York and Max B is a legend. All of that is true, but there's something else he says that absolutely floored me. Dave East admits that before he went to Max B's dinner, he called Jim Jones. He had a man-to-man conversation with Jim to let him know what he was doing. Now think about that for a second. Dave East felt the need to call Jim Jones before going to Max B's dinner. That tells you everything you need to know about how serious this situation is. Dave East, who is a grown man, who is his own artist, who can go wherever he wants, felt like he needed permission, or at least he needed to give Jim a heads up, because he knew that if he didn't, it could be seen as disrespectful. It could be seen as picking a side. And in this world where loyalty is everything, that kind of move could have consequences. So Dave makes the call, he explains the situation, he tries to keep things smooth. But even with that call, the fact that he went to the dinner still put him in a very uncomfortable position. Because now the internet is watching, the streets are watching, and people want to know. And this is where things get really uncomfortable for Dave East. Because the internet does not do nuance. The internet does not do, I'm cool with both sides. The internet wants you to pick a side. And if you don't, they'll pick one for you. So people start coming at Dave East on social media. They're asking why he went to Max B's dinner. They're questioning his loyalty to Jim. And Dave tries to stand firm. He tries to say, I'm not picking sides. I can show love to both. And listen, I respect that. I really do. Because in a perfect world, that's how it should work. You should be able to show respect to multiple people without it being a problem. But this is not a perfect world. This is hip hop. This is New York. This is a 15-year beef that has real history. And in this world, trying to stay neutral can actually be the riskiest move of all. Because when you refuse to pick a side, both sides start to wonder if they can trust you. Jim might be thinking, if Dave can go to Max's dinner so easily, where does his loyalty really lie? And Max might be thinking, if Dave had to call Jim before coming to see me, does that mean he's really on Jim's side? So even though Dave is trying to do the right thing by staying neutral, he's actually putting himself in a position where nobody is fully satisfied. And that's a terrible place to be. Because now, no matter what Dave does, someone's going to have something to say about it. If he shows up to another Max B event, people will say he's switching sides. If he stays close to Jim, people will say he's scared to stand on his own. It's a lose-lose situation. And honestly, I feel bad for Dave East in this moment because he didn't ask for this. He just wanted to pay respect to a legend coming home. But because of the history between Jim and Max, even that simple gesture gets turned into a loyalty test. And that brings us to one of the most powerful moments in this entire podcast episode. Because Fabulous, who has been mostly quiet up until this point, finally speaks. And what he says, it might be the realest thing I've heard all year.
So, Fabulous is on the podcast, and he's asked about Max B. And Fab doesn't sugarcoat it. He doesn't try to be politically correct. He just tells the truth. He says, and I'm paraphrasing here, that he avoids certain situations involving Max B because his loyalty to Jim Jones comes first. And then he drops this line. Everybody is your brother until it's time to do brothership. Wow. Just wow. That line alone could carry an entire documentary. Because what Fabulous is saying is this. It's easy to call someone your brother when everything is good. It's easy to show love when there's no conflict, no tension, no hard decisions to make. But the real test of brotherhood, that comes when you have to choose. When you have to sacrifice something. When you have to stand by someone even when it's uncomfortable. And according to Fab, a lot of people who call each other brothers fail that test. Because when it's time to actually do brother shit, when it's time to show up, to defend, to sacrifice, suddenly people disappear. And the reason this line is so powerful is because it exposes the hidden rules of loyalty in hip-hop. It shows that there are levels to this. That not everyone who calls you brother is actually willing to treat you like one. And it reveals the pressure that comes with these kinds of friendships. Because if you're Fabulous and you're close with Jim Jones and Jim has a problem with Max B, well, now you have to navigate that. You have to make decisions based on that history, even if you, personally, don't have any issues with Max. And that's exhausting. Because it means you can't just move freely. You can't just show love to whoever you want. You have to constantly consider the politics, the history, the optics. And when Fab says that line, everybody is your brother until it's time to do brother shit, he's basically admitting that in his world, loyalty to Jim Jones means keeping a certain distance from Max B. Even if he respects Max, even if he has no personal beef, the loyalty demands it. And when Fab said that, the room went quiet. The chat exploded. The comment section lost its mind. Because this wasn't just a clever line. This was a confession. This was Fab pulling back the curtain and showing people how this world really works. And it's heavy. Because it shows that even after all these years, even after Max B has been in prison for over a decade, the weight of that beef is still affecting people's lives. It's still dictating who can talk to who can show up where, who can show love to who. And that brings us to something Mino said on the podcast that made this whole situation feel even darker.
So Mino, who has been facilitating this whole conversation, finally addresses the elephant in the room. He says, point blank, this wasn't just rap beef. This wasn't just social media drama. This was serious. And when he says that, the entire tone of the podcast shifts, because up until this point, there's been this slight undercurrent of entertainment. Like, oh, this is messy, but it's also kind of interesting to watch. But when Mino says that, when he reminds everyone that this beef had real-life consequences, it stops being entertainment. It becomes real. Because Jim Jones and Max B didn't just have a falling out over music. This wasn't about who sold more records or who had the better verse. This was about money. This was about loyalty. This was about respect. This was about betrayal. And when you're dealing with that level of conflict, it doesn't just go away because time passes. It leaves scars. It leaves trauma. It leaves a legacy that affects everyone around them. And that's why people like Fabulous and Dave East are in such difficult positions, because they're not just navigating a beef, they're navigating decades of history that they weren't even directly involved in. And that's the thing about loyalty in hip-hop. It's inherited. If you're close with someone, their enemies become your enemies. Their conflicts become your conflicts. Even if you have no personal issue with the other person, you're expected to act like you do. And that's what makes this whole situation so complicated. Because Jim and Max's beef isn't just their beef anymore. It's become part of the culture. It's become part of the fabric of New York hip-hop. And everyone who's connected to either of them has to navigate that, whether they like it or not. But here's where things get really interesting. Because despite all of this history, despite all of this tension, despite all of this weight, there are signs that a reconciliation might actually be possible.
Okay, so hear me out on this. Throughout this entire podcast episode, there are these little moments, these subtle hints that suggest the energy around this beef is starting to shift. Dave East, despite the tension, was still able to go to Max B's dinner and maintain his relationship with Jim. Fabulous, despite being loyal to Jim, still acknowledges Max B as a legend. He doesn't disrespect them. And Mino, who was on Jim's podcast, who was clearly in Jim's circle, talks about Max with a level of respect that wouldn't have been possible a few years ago. So what does all of this mean? It means the walls are starting to come down. It means that even though the beef is still there, even though the history is still heavy, people are starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, it's time to move forward. And here's the thing. New York needs this. The culture needs this. Because for 15 years, this beef has cast a shadow over an entire generation of New York hip-hop. It's divided people. It's created tension. It's forced artists to choose sides when they just want to make music and show love. And the new generation? They're tired of it. They didn't live through the original conflict. They don't have the same emotional investment in the beef. What they do have is a desire to see New York unified. They want to see legends come together, not stay divided. And that energy is palpable right now. You can feel it in the way people are talking about Max B's return. You can feel it in the way people are hoping for reconciliation. And here's the wildest part. And I'm not saying this is confirmed, but I'm saying people are talking. There have allegedly been private conversations between the camps. Some people are saying that Dave East's respect call to Jim was deeper than he let on in the podcast. Some people are saying that Mino's confidence when talking about Max B suggests that he knows more than he's saying. And some people are even suggesting that the fact that Jim didn't say anything negative about Max might actually be a sign that he's open to letting things cool down. Now, I don't know if any of that is true. I'm not claiming to have insider information. But what I am saying is that the possibility of a sit-down between Jim Jones and Max B, something that fans never thought would happen, now feels closer than it ever has before. And that would be monumental. Because if Jim and Max could squash their beef, if they could sit down and have a conversation, if they could show the culture that growth and forgiveness are possible, man, that would change everything. It would set an example for the next generation. It would prove that you don't have to carry grudges forever. It would show that healing is possible even after years of pain. And honestly, that's what New York deserves. Because New York hip-hop has given the world so much, but it's also been held back by internal division for too long. And if this is the moment where that starts to change, if this is the beginning of a new era of unity, then Max B's homecoming isn't just about one man getting his freedom back. It's about an entire culture getting a chance to heal. But before we get too optimistic, we have to talk about the reality of the situation. Because as much as people want reconciliation, as much as the energy is shifting, this is still a very delicate situation. Okay, so hear me out on this. Throughout this entire podcast episode, there are these little moments, these subtle hints that suggest the energy around this beef is starting to shift. Dave East, despite the tension, was still able to go to Max B's dinner and maintain his relationship with Jim. Fabulous, despite being loyal to Jim, still acknowledges Max B as a legend. He doesn't disrespect him. And Mino, who was on Jim's podcast, who is clearly in Jim's circle, talks about Max with a level of respect that wouldn't have been possible a few years ago. So, what does all of this mean? It means the walls are starting to come down. It means that even though the beef is still there, even though the history is still heavy, people are starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, it's time to move forward. And here's the thing. New York needs this. The culture needs this. Because for 15 years, this beef has cast a shadow on an entire generation of New York hip-hop. It's divided people, it's created tension, it's forced artists to choose sides when they just want to make music and show love. And the new generation, they're tired of it. They didn't live through the original conflict. They don't have the same emotional investment in the beef. What they do have is a desire to see New York unified. They want to see legends come together, not stay divided. And that energy is palpable right now. You can feel it in the way people are talking about Max B's return. You can feel it in the way people are hoping for reconciliation. And here's the wildest part. According to industry whispers, and I'm not saying this is confirmed, but I'm saying people are talking, there have allegedly been private conversations between the camps. Some people are saying the Dave East respect call to Jim was deeper than he let on in the podcast. Some people are saying that Mino's confidence when talking about Max suggests that he knows more than he's saying. And some people are even suggesting that the fact that Jim didn't say anything negative about Max might actually be a sign that he's open to letting things cool down. Now, I don't know if any of that is true. I'm not claiming to have insider information, but what I am saying is that the possibility of a sit-down between Jim Jones and Max B, something that fans never thought would happen, now feels closer than it ever has before. And that would be monumental. Because if Jim and Max could squash their beef, if they could sit down and have a conversation, if they could show the culture that growth and forgiveness are possible, man, that would change everything. It would set an example for the next generation. It would prove that you don't have to carry grudges forever. It would show that healing is possible even after years of pain. And honestly, that's what New York deserves. Because New York hip-hop has given the world so much, but it's also been held back by internal division for too long. And if this is the moment where that starts to change, if this is the beginning of a new era of unity, then Max B's homecoming isn't just about one man getting his freedom back. It's about an entire culture getting a chance to heal.
But before we get too optimistic, we have to talk about the reality of the situation. Because as much as people want reconciliation, as much as that energy is shifting, this is still a very delicate situation. So here's where we are. Max B is home. Jim Jones dropped a podcast on the same day. Whether by coincidence or strategy, we may never know. Dave East is caught in the middle, trying to show love to both sides without picking a lane. Fabulous revealed the brutal truth about loyalty and brotherhood in hip-hop. And Mino reminded everyone that this beef was never just entertainment. It was real, it was serious, and it had consequences. But despite all of that, despite the history, despite the tension, despite the complexity, there is a feeling in the air right now. A feeling that maybe, just maybe, New York is ready to move forward. Because the new generation doesn't want to inherit old beefs. They don't want to be forced to choose sides in conflicts they didn't start. What they want is unity. They want to see their legends celebrate each other, not tear each other down. And for the first time in 15 years, that vision feels possible. Not guaranteed, not easy, but possible. And that's a powerful thing. Because if Jim Jones and Max B can find a way to reconcile, if they can sit down, have a conversation, and let go of the past, it would send shockwaves through the entire culture. It would show that growth is possible, that forgiveness is possible, that you don't have to be defined by your worst moments forever. And that is the message that hip-hop needs right now. Not more division, not more beefs, not more loyalty tests and impossible choices. What hip-hop needs, what New York needs, is healing. And Max B's homecoming might just be the catalyst for that healing to begin. Now, I'm not naive. I know that reconciliation is a long shot. I know that the history is deep and the wounds are real. But I also know that stranger things have happened. I know that people can surprise you. I know that sometimes the most unlikely outcomes are the ones that end up changing everything. So yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm hopeful that Jim and Max can find a way forward. I'm hopeful that the next generation can build something better. And I'm hopeful that this moment, Max B's return, Jim's strategic silence, Dave East's loyalty dilemma, Fab's powerful confession, will be remembered not as another chapter in a tragic beef, but as the beginning of a new era for New York hip-hop. An era defined by unity, growth, and respect. And honestly, that's a future worth fighting for. Because at the end of the day, this culture, our culture, is bigger than any one beef, is bigger than any one person. And if we can find a way to come together, to lift each other up, to celebrate our legends together, then maybe, just maybe, we can create something truly special. So yeah, that's where we're at. Max B is home, Jim Jones is silent, Dave East is caught in the middle, Fab dropped a truth bomb, and the culture is watching, waiting, hoping for what comes next. And whatever happens, it's gonna be legendary.
So yeah, that's all I got for you today. This story is far from over. The streets are still buzzing, the internet is still debating, and the possibility of a Jim Jones and Max B reconciliation is still hanging in the air like a question mark. I want to know what you think. Drop a comment below and let me know. Do you think Jim's podcast timing was strategic or just a coincidence? Do you think Davies handled the situation correctly, or should he have picked a side? And most importantly, do you think Jim Jones and Max B will ever reconcile, or is that beef too deep to ever fully heal? Let me know in the comments. I read all of them and I love hearing your perspectives. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It genuinely helps more people see these kinds of in-depth conversations, and I appreciate every single one of you who supports the channel. Coming up next, I'm going to be breaking down another situation that's been blowing up the culture recently, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. All right, y'all, I'm out. Stay safe, stay informed, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.